A barefoot girl stands on the street clutching her baby brother, then turns to a billionaire and says, "Take him, save his life." What he does next shocks everyone. 9-year-old Harper stood barefoot on the icy pavement outside a busy suburban grocery store on the edge of Madison. Her toes were red from the cold, and her oversized coat hung off her small frame like a curtain stolen from an abandoned motel. In her trembling arms, she clutched a bundled-up baby boy wrapped in a worn, faded blanket. That was Jerry, her little brother, barely a year and a half old, his head resting weakly against her chest. His skin was hot with fever, and every now and then, he let out a dry, rattling cough that sent a bolt of panic through Harper's thin body. She looked around with large, dark eyes, cautious, alert, but not afraid. She had been here before. She knew this sidewalk better than any playground. Harper had learned to read people's eyes, who might offer a smile, who would turn away, and who would look at her with that bitter mix of pity and disgust. Today, none of the eyes met hers. The sky was a pale, heavy gray, and the cold wind sliced through the parking lot, sending Harper's tangled curls whipping across her face. She pressed her lips to Jerry's forehead and whispered, "I got you, okay? Just hold on." But inside, she was breaking. 3 days. 3 full days with nothing but half a granola bar she found behind a gas station. Her stomach ached, her limbs felt heavy, and her thoughts were growing foggy. But none of that mattered, not as long as Jerry was alive. She had tried asking for food, quietly at first, just holding up a hand near the shopping carts. But people ignored her. Then she tried to explain her situation, but no one listened. Some even told her to go back to wherever she came from. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then she saw the car. A long, sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently into the parking lot and came to a slow stop near the entrance. The kind of car that looked like it belonged in a movie about kings and presidents. Harper's heart thudded. The door opened and a tall man stepped out. Early 30s, sharply dressed in a tailored navy coat with dark gloves and polished leather shoes that clicked when he walked. His face was clean-shaven, his jaw defined, his expression unreadable. Harper didn't know who he was. She didn't care. All she saw was a man who didn't flinch at cold weather, who didn't look tired or hungry or afraid, a man who maybe, just maybe, had the power to save her brother. And so, before her courage could escape her, Harper stepped forward. The man had only taken a few steps toward the store when he heard the voice. "Sir, please." He turned slowly, as if not entirely sure the words were meant for him. His eyes met Harper's. For a second, he said nothing, perhaps mistaking her for a runaway, or one of the countless kids trying to guilt strangers into handing over a few dollars. But then, he saw the baby in her arms, saw the seriousness on her face, and he paused. Harper swallowed hard and took one shaky step forward. "Please, I, I need you to take him." The man blinked. "What did you say?" Harper's voice cracked, but she held her ground. "My brother, Jerry. He's sick. He's got a fever and I can't help him anymore. I thought I could, but I can't. Please, you look like someone who could help him. You look like someone who wouldn't let him die." The man stared at her. For the first time in years, Judson Baines, the elusive tech billionaire, founder of Apexion Systems, a man who hadn't cried since his mother's funeral at 16, felt something clawing at his chest. He didn't know this girl. He didn't know her story. But in her eyes, he saw a weight no child should carry. And in her voice, he heard a quiet desperation that made the world around them seem to fall silent. "You want me to take your brother?" Harper nodded, her eyes locked on his. "He's all I have. But if I hold on to him, he'll die. I don't care what happens to me. Just promise you'll keep him alive." For a moment, neither of them moved. A car honked in the distance. Wind rustled a shopping cart across the asphalt. But Judson Baines stood there, frozen in place, caught in a moment that would forever divide his life into two parts. Before he met the girl, and after. He slowly took off one glove and knelt in front of her, his voice quiet. What's your name?" "Harper." "And his?" "Jerry. He's just a baby. He doesn't even know the world is this cruel yet." Judson felt a sharp breath catch in his throat, and in that moment, without knowing why, he made a decision that would upend everything he thought he believed. He reached for his phone. "Bring the car around now," he said into the speaker, "and call Dr. Ellery. Tell her to meet me at the estate. We have 2 children coming home." The drive back to Judson Baines's estate was silent, tense, and unlike any car ride he had ever taken. Harper sat stiffly in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, her bony arms wrapped protectively around Jerry, who whimpered softly against her chest. The baby's skin burned with fever, and his breathing was shallow, each inhale a desperate gasp. Harper didn't look out the window at the passing mansions or perfectly trimmed hedges of Lakeshore Row. She kept her eyes glued to Jerry's face, brushing sweat-damp curls off his forehead, whispering over and over, "Stay with me, baby. Please stay with me." Judson sat beside her, but he didn't speak either. He had seen billion-dollar deals collapse in boardrooms. He'd watched empires rise and fall, but nothing, not a single headline or market crash, had ever gripped him like the sight of that girl on the street, begging a stranger to take her brother. The ride was only 12 minutes long, but to Harper, it felt like a year. When they pulled up to the estate gates, tall wrought iron structures with security cameras and motion detectors, Harper's eyes widened slightly. The property behind them looked more like a private museum than a home. The mansion itself was massive. White stone, symmetrical windows, sweeping staircases, and glowing lights on the balconies. She'd never seen anything like it, but she wasn't impressed. She was worried. Was this a trap? Would they take Jerry from her now? What if they told her to stay in the car while they took him inside? She clutched him tighter and prepared to run. The driver, a stern man in uniform named Folsom, opened the door. Judson turned to Harper and said softly, "You both come with me. No one's taking him from you." She didn't fully believe him yet, but she nodded and followed. Inside, the estate was warm and smelled faintly of citrus and cedarwood. A grand chandelier sparkled above them as they stepped into the foyer. The marble floor echoed with each of Harper's hesitant steps. She felt out of place, a shadow among gold and glass. Within seconds, a woman in her 40s came rushing down the staircase. Her dark gray cardigan was wrinkled, and her long auburn hair was pulled into a loose ponytail. She carried a black leather medical bag and had a stethoscope already around her neck. "Where is he?" she asked urgently, her eyes locking on the baby. Harper instinctively took a step back, shielding Jerry with her body. Judson raised a hand gently. "Harper, this is Dr. Molly Ellery. She's the best pediatrician in the state. I called her because I want Jerry to get help. You'll be right beside him." Harper hesitated, but then Jerry let out a cough so harsh it sounded like it tore his tiny chest open. Panic shot through her. She looked up at Molly, whose face was lined with concern but kind. Slowly, Harper stepped forward. Molly took the baby into her arms with practiced tenderness and nodded to Judson. "Guess Sweet B is quiet and has a humidifier. I'll set up there." As Molly carried Jerry down the hallway, Harper instinctively followed, only looking back once to make sure Judson wasn't stopping her. He didn't. In fact, he was walking behind them like a silent guardian. The next few hours were a blur of thermometers, oxygen monitors, and medical jargon. Harper sat in the corner of the guest room, knees tucked into her chest, watching everything. Molly spoke gently, explaining things in plain terms. "He has a high-grade fever and signs of early pneumonia, but you brought him just in time." Judson stood quietly at the door the whole time, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't understand most of what Molly was saying, but he understood one thing. The baby would live, because of Harper. Later that night, after Jerry had been given fluids and fell asleep in a soft crib brought in just for him, Harper finally let herself rest. She didn't sleep in the bed. She lay curled up on a thick blanket next to Jerry's crib, one hand reaching through the bars to touch his tiny fingers. Judson watched her from the doorway for a long while. There was no television playing, no notifications on his phone he cared to check. In that quiet room, lit only by a soft amber lamp, he saw something he'd never seen in any boardroom, gala, or luxury penthouse. Courage, in its purest form. This girl, homeless, freezing, starving, had refused to give up. She had carried her baby brother through the storm, fought off fear, and approached a total stranger with a plea no child should ever have to make. He walked away that night feeling something foreign in his chest. The next morning, the sun was just beginning to rise when Judson returned to the guest suite with a tray of breakfast. Toast, scrambled eggs, orange slices, and a glass of milk. He wasn't sure what kids liked, but it seemed like a start. He opened the door slowly and found Harper still asleep on the floor, her fingers curled around the crib rail. He didn't wake her. He set the tray on the nightstand and stood quietly for a moment. Then, almost without realizing it, he whispered to no one in particular, You're safe now. Later that morning, Harper woke to the faint smell of scrambled eggs and something citrusy, orange slices maybe. Her eyes blinked open slowly. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The warmth, the softness of the blanket beneath her, the absence of car horns or cold pavement, it all felt too strange, too distant from the reality she had known. Then, she remembered. The billionaire, the mansion, Jerry coughing in her arms. She shot upright and looked into the crib next to her. Jerry was still there, wrapped in clean blankets, his little chest rising and falling slowly, but steadily. A soft hum from the humidifier filled the room. His cheeks were still flushed, but he was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Next to the crib stood a small wooden table with a tray of food, toast, eggs, milk, and fruit. Harper stared at it like it was a trick. She glanced around quickly, half expecting someone to yell at her for even looking at it. But no one did. She sat up slowly, her back aching from the floor, and leaned forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a piece of toast. The butter had melted into the bread. Her stomach growled with desperation. She took a small bite, then another, until her eyes watered from the sheer warmth of it. "Good morning?" Harper froze. Judson Baines stood in the doorway, dressed in a casual dark sweater and gray slacks, without his usual overcoat. His face looked less severe than the night before. The lines around his mouth were relaxed, and his eyes, though still guarded, had softened. Harper swallowed the bite of toast quickly and stood up, wiping her hands on her pants. "I'm sorry," she said instinctively, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to—" "You don't have to apologize," Judson interrupted gently. "It's for you and Jerry." She glanced down at the tray again, still unsure if it was really okay. Judson took a few steps into the room and sat on the armchair near the crib. "He's stable. Dr. Ellery said his fever broke early this morning. The meds helped. He's not out of the woods yet, but he's much better." Harper lowered herself slowly back down beside the crib, her eyes still locked on her brother. She nodded faintly. "Thank you." There was a long silence. Judson leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Harper, I need to ask. How long were you out there? Alone?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "Almost 2 months. After the last place kicked us out." "The last place?" "A shelter. But they didn't allow babies at night. Said he cried too much?" Her voice cracked at the memory. "So we left." Judson's jaw tensed. The idea of any institution turning away a sick baby was unthinkable to him. But Harper wasn't finished. "I tried asking for help. But people don't really see you when you're dirty. They look past you like you're a ghost. Some of them gave coins, but most just stared like I did something wrong." She reached through the bars of the crib again, gently brushing Jerry's hair. "He got sick a week ago. I tried to keep him warm, but it was getting worse. I knew I had to do something. So when I saw you, I thought maybe you were rich enough not to be afraid of us." Her words hit Judson like a punch to the chest. "Not afraid," he murmured. "Just unprepared." Harper looked at him then. Really looked. For a second, Judson saw more than exhaustion in her eyes. He saw suspicion, the kind that comes from experience. She was wondering, he realized, what he was going to do with her. What price would come next? "I don't want to go to a shelter," she said suddenly. "They'll take him from me. I know how it works." "I'm not sending you to a shelter," Judson said immediately. "You won't split us up?" "No." He stood and walked toward the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. The winter sun cast long shadows across the estate grounds, trees bare and skeletal in the distance. "I never had siblings," he said. "Just me and my mother. She died when I was 16. After that, I shut a lot of things out. People, emotions. I built walls, tall ones." He turned back toward Harper. "You walked right through them." Harper looked down, unsure how to respond. Judson cleared his throat. "You're safe here, for as long as you want to be. I can bring in tutors, doctors, whatever you need. This isn't temporary unless you want it to be." Harper's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why?" Judson thought for a long moment. "Because you made me see something I forgot existed. Because when you stood there on that sidewalk and asked me to save your brother, you did it without crying, without begging. You did it like someone who already lost everything except love. That's more strength than I've ever seen in anyone. Tears formed in Harper's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. And because, Judson added quietly, I don't think you and Jerry came into my life by accident. He walked toward the door, pausing only once to glance at her again. I'll have a proper room prepared for you today, one with a real bed. But until then, if you need anything, you call for me, okay? Harper hesitated, then gave a small nod. After the door closed, she looked down at Jerry, who was still asleep. She whispered, I think we might have just found home. For the first time in weeks, her voice didn't shake. It didn't take long for the atmosphere inside the estate to shift. The mansion that once echoed with silence and businesslike order now pulsed with the subtle rhythms of life, cries, giggles, footsteps. Harper and Jerry brought a fragile, chaotic warmth that felt both foreign and oddly welcome. Within 2 days, Harper had a room of her own on the second floor, just 2 doors down from Jerry's nursery, which had been custom designed by a team of professionals overnight. Judson spared no expense. Cribs, monitors, hypoallergenic bedding, soft nightlights shaped like stars. The room even had a tiny library shelf, filled with age-appropriate books and toys, still in their packaging. But Harper didn't care about decor. She only cared about Jerry, and the unshakable fear that this was all temporary, a dream, a trick. She tried not to show it, but Judson noticed. He began walking her to the nursery each night, sitting with her for a few minutes before bed. He didn't speak much. He didn't know how to, not yet. But his presence was steady. One evening, as she brushed her hair quietly at the vanity, she heard voices outside her door. She moved closer and listened, her fingers frozen in mid-brush. Judson, came a firm, polished voice, feminine and annoyed. You cannot keep them here like this. This is reckless. She's not even related to you. It was Veronica Cates, his public relations advisor. Harper had seen her once earlier that day, tall, sharp features, dressed like she walked off a runway. She didn't look at Harper. She looked through her. I don't need your permission, Veronica, Judson replied coolly. No, but you'll need damage control when the media gets wind of this. You picked up some random street kids, and now they're living here? Your shareholders are already panicking. You're not a charity. They're not street kids. Their names are Harper and Jerry, and they're staying. There was a heavy pause. You've changed, Judson, Veronica said, her voice quieter. You used to understand consequences. You used to protect your brand. Judson's response came with quiet finality. Maybe I was protecting the wrong things. Harper's eyes stung. She backed away from the door and returned to the mirror, her brush still in hand, but her reflection looked different now. Less like a ghost. Later that night, while Judson sat in his office, staring out at the frost-covered garden, his assistant approached with a sealed folder. It's the file on Harper and Jerry, he said, placing it gently on the mahogany desk. From the private investigator you requested. Judson hesitated before opening it. He wasn't sure why it felt wrong, invading their past like this. But he had to know what had happened to them before they ended up on his doorstep. The file was thin. That in itself was telling. The children had no known father. Their mother, Sheila Harrison, had been an administrative assistant for a small firm that provided cybersecurity consultation. Ironically, one of Judson's subsidiary contractors. 3 years ago, Sheila died in a hit-and-run accident late at night, walking home from a double shift. No suspect had ever been found. There were no next of kin. Harper had gone into the system briefly, but had run away from a foster home within 2 months. After that, she vanished. No one had looked for her. Judson closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. How could someone so small carry so much pain? And why was no one, there to stop it? That night, he made another phone call. I want a legal team on this, he told his top attorney. Begin guardianship paperwork immediately, and pull any files involving Sheila Harrison's case. I want to know why no one ever followed up. The attorney hesitated. Sir, that was filed as a closed accident. Reopen it, Judson snapped, and keep my name off it. Meanwhile, Harper was beginning to relax little by little. Molly Ellery became a frequent presence, checking on Jerry's health, but also chatting with Harper, telling her stories about her own childhood, baking muffins in the kitchen, even showing her how to wrap a baby correctly in a warm towel. Harper absorbed it all like a sponge. But trust didn't come easily. One night, Harper wandered downstairs and found herself near the grand piano in the music room. She stood there, staring at it, her fingers twitching. Judson entered behind her, unnoticed at first. "You play?" he asked softly. She jumped and turned. "No, but my mom used to hum when she worked. I remember some of the melodies." Judson walked over and lifted the piano lid. "I want to try." Harper sat cautiously, her legs barely reaching the pedals. She tapped a single key, then another. A hesitant pattern emerged, broken, slow, but recognizable. She was trying to recreate a tune from memory. Judson didn't interrupt. He simply watched. When she finished, he nodded. "That was beautiful." Harper gave a faint smile. Then she whispered, Do you think Jerry will remember any of this?" Judson sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the piano keys. "If he remembers anything," he said, "I hope it's the sound of his sister refusing to give up on him." Harper didn't speak again, but she leaned against his shoulder for the briefest moment before pulling away. That small gesture, a spark of closeness, meant more to Judson than any handshake he'd ever made in a boardroom. In the days that followed, rumors began swirling in the media. A billionaire harboring children, speculations about adoption, whispers of scandal. Judson ignored it all. Because for the first time in years, the headlines didn't matter. What mattered was the way Harper read to Jerry every night. The way she whispered, "You're safe now," into his ear. The way she was beginning to believe it herself. The storm came on a Thursday. It began with a phone call. Harper was in the garden with Jerry bundled in a stroller, both of them enjoying a rare moment of sun between icy winds, when Judson was summoned back into the mansion by his assistant, Elijah. A call had come in from a government line, Department of Family and Child Services. Judson listened, jaw tightening with each word. They had received an anonymous report. Allegations: unlawful housing of minors, lack of proper guardianship documentation, possible child endangerment. A caseworker was already en route, with authorization to assess the situation and potentially remove the children. He hung up without saying goodbye. Outside, Harper was crouching beside Jerry, showing him how to blow on a dandelion puff she'd found in the grass. Her laugh, small and surprised, floated into the air, carried by a breeze that would soon change everything. Judson stepped out, his voice calm but firm. "Harper, I need you both inside. Now." She immediately tensed. "Is something wrong?" He crouched to her level, his voice dropping. "There's someone coming. From the government. They say they need to check on you and Jerry." Her entire body stiffened. Her hand flew to the stroller handle, as though preparing to run. "No," she whispered. "They're gonna take him. They always do this." Judson placed a hand on her arm, not to stop her, but to anchor her. "Harper, I won't let them. You hear me? You're not going through this alone." She stared at him for a long moment, lips trembling, but slowly nodded. 20 minutes later, the caseworker arrived. Her name was Ms. Valerie Draycott, mid-50s, crisp gray suit, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp behind square glasses. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself beyond the basic formalities. To her, this was routine. She was led into the sitting room, where Harper stood protectively in front of Jerry's bassinet. Molly was already there, standing beside them like a silent shield. "Mr. Baines," Ms. Draycott began, not bothering to sit. "We've received troubling reports regarding 2 minors residing here without proper legal documentation. Our priority is the welfare of the children." Judson stood with the poise of a seasoned CEO, but inside he was fighting the urge to slam the door in her face. "I am aware of the legal complexity," he said carefully, "but I have already initiated the guardianship process through my legal team. Harper and Jerry are safe, fed, clothed, under medical care, in a stable environment." "None of that negates procedure," Ms. Draycott replied sharply. "Until legal custody is granted, these children are considered state dependents. If they were abandoned, they belong in transitional care until further placement is confirmed." Harper's voice cut in, high-pitched and raw. We weren't abandoned." The caseworker turned to her, startled. "My mom died," Harper continued, her voice shaking, "and no one came. No one looked for us. I kept us alive. Me, not the state, not you." Ms. Draycott narrowed her eyes. "That doesn't make you a legal guardian." "I'm his sister," Harper cried, tears finally breaking free. "Please don't take him. I can't sleep without hearing him breathe." Judson stepped forward. "Now, Valerie," he said, dropping formalities deliberately. "You want to talk law? Fine. But you'll have to explain to a federal judge why you tore a recovering infant from medical care and traumatized a child under my temporary protection. And you'll need to do that in the presence of my lawyers, my physicians, and a dozen cameras I'm about to invite here. Ms. Draycott faltered. Is that a threat, Mr. Baines? No, he said coolly. That's me being very, very generous. There was a long silence. Then, reluctantly, she adjusted her glasses and stepped back. You have 72 hours, she said. Either the paperwork is filed and reviewed, or we'll return with enforcement. And with that, she turned and left. The room stayed quiet for a long time after the door closed. Then Harper collapsed onto the couch, holding Jerry tightly in her arms as if he could vanish into the air. She sobbed. Not the silent, dry tears she was used to, but loud, gut-wrenching cries that tore from deep inside. Judson stood frozen, unable to move. But then he stepped forward and sat beside her. Slowly, carefully, he placed a hand on her back. I'm so tired, she whispered through her tears. I'm so tired of losing. Judson's voice was barely audible. You're not going to lose this time. That night, he didn't sleep. His legal team worked non-stop, drawing up emergency guardianship papers. A private judge was contacted. Every string Judson could pull, he pulled. Not because of PR, not for appearances, but because Harper deserved to wake up in the morning and not be afraid of being alone again, and Jerry deserved to grow up in a home that wouldn't disappear overnight. By morning, the guardianship paperwork was filed. The estate was now protected under an emergency protection order. But Judson knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about helping two children anymore. It was about becoming something he'd never expected to be, needed, irreplaceable, a father. The house had never felt more alive or more on edge. Though Judson's emergency guardianship was now on record, the emotional aftershocks of the confrontation with child services lingered like a bruise under the surface. Harper remained silent most of the next day, trailing quietly behind Jerry's stroller, her posture tense, shoulders tight. She didn't eat much. When spoken to, she nodded, but her eyes carried the haunted look of someone always bracing for loss, Judson noticed. So did Molly, who dropped by with fresh homemade chicken soup that evening and sat with Harper on the back porch as the girl absent-mindedly rocked Jerry's stroller. He's getting stronger, you know, Molly said gently. That cough's almost gone. Harper didn't look up. What if they still take him? Molly paused, then leaned in. I've been working with children for over 20 years, Harper, and I've seen a lot, but I've never seen someone fight harder for someone they love than you have. You're not invisible anymore. Not with Judson in your corner. And definitely not with me. Harper looked up then. Just a flicker of a glance, but it was enough. That night, Judson stood by his study window, staring out into the dark, frost-glittered garden. He had always lived in high towers, not just literally, but metaphorically. A fortress of logic, numbers, distance. But lately, everything had changed. He hadn't looked at his investment portfolio in a week. His phone had buzzed for hours with messages from board members and business partners, some confused, others furious. But he hadn't answered any of them, because his focus was here, in this house, with these two fragile souls who had forced their way into his life like a bolt of lightning in winter. He turned from the window and opened the manila folder that Elijah had left on his desk earlier that day. Inside were more detailed findings from the private investigator, employment history, accident reports, and something unexpected, a printed photo. It was a small, grainy image of a woman with copper-colored braids and a bright smile, standing outside what looked like an office building. Her name was typed underneath, Sheila Harrison, Harper and Jerry's mother. Judson stared at it for a long time. Then his eyes moved to the company name in the background, Briosec Consulting. He knew that name well. It had been one of Apexion's minor acquisitions years ago, a small cybersecurity firm absorbed for its patented software. He hadn't been involved in the acquisition directly, but the name triggered something in the back of his mind. He opened another file and searched through emails until he found an internal memo dated 3 years ago. It confirmed it. Briosec had let go of over a dozen employees before the merger, including Sheila Harrison. The reason cited, internal conflict and performance disputes. But further investigation revealed something darker. Sheila had accused a senior project manager, Martin Vale, of stealing her code and presenting it as his own. The complaint was buried. Her dismissal followed days later. Vale was later promoted after the merger, Judson's stomach twisted. It was his company, his decision. Even if he hadn't known the details at the time, this was the result of his system, one that valued profit and speed over people. Sheila had lost her job, then her housing, and eventually her life, and the children. They had paid the rest of the price. That night, Judson didn't sleep. At dawn, he called Elijah into the study. "Schedule a press conference," he said. "I'm reopening the internal investigation into the Briosec merger. I want every file pulled, every name exposed." Elijah blinked. "Sir, you understand what that could cost you?" Judson's expression was flat. "It already cost me more than I can ever repay." Later that day, the press room inside Apexion's headquarters filled with journalists. Judson stepped behind the podium, dressed not in a tailored designer suit, but a simple charcoal sweater and dark slacks. The look was intentional. He wasn't here to perform. "I am here today not to announce a product or celebrate a quarter," he began. "I'm here because I made a mistake. A woman named Sheila Harrison once worked for one of my companies. She was let go unfairly, and her complaint was buried under bureaucracy. That negligence contributed to a chain of events that led to her death and left 2 children homeless, children who are now in my care." Murmurs swept through the crowd. "I am not speaking as a CEO today," he continued. "I am speaking as someone who met a girl named Harper on a sidewalk. A girl who handed me her baby brother and said, 'Please save him.' She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for help. She asked for someone to care." He paused, voice low but steady. "I failed their mother. I won't fail them." The next morning, the media storm erupted. Headlines screamed, "Tech mogul admits corporate negligence. Billionaire blamed and families collapse. Orphaned siblings. Find sanctuary in CEO's mansion." Judson didn't read the articles. He only cared about one thing: Harper's reaction. When she saw the press conference, she didn't say anything. She just sat at the kitchen island, watching the video on Molly's tablet. When it ended, she turned to Judson, who had entered the room just as it finished, and asked quietly, "You told the world?" "Yes," he replied, "even if it makes people hate you." "I don't care if the world hates me," he said, "as long as you know the truth, and as long as you and Jerry are safe." Harper stood up, walked over to him, and did something she had never done before. She hugged him, tightly, wordlessly, like a daughter. And for the first time since she arrived, she let herself believe that this wasn't a dream. This was real. Spring crept into Madison like a shy guest, hesitant, soft, but unmistakably present. The ice melted from the garden paths, crocuses pushed up through the thawing soil, and birdsong returned to the tall trees that surrounded the Baines estate. And within the mansion, subtle changes mirrored the shifting season. Jerry, now fully recovered, was babbling happily in his high chair each morning. He'd begun to respond to his name, stretch out his arms toward Harper, and mimic clapping with his tiny fists. His cheeks had filled out, pink and healthy, and the cough that once rattled in his chest was gone. He had toys now, more than he knew what to do with, but his favorite, without question, was Harper's hand. Wherever she went, his eyes followed. And Harper, she was blossoming too, though she didn't know it. She had started taking lessons from a private tutor named Ms. Lavinia Pierce, a retired literature professor with silver curls and a voice like velvet. At first, Harper had been hesitant, answering questions with one-word replies, guarding herself like always. But Lavinia had patience in her bones, and by the second week, Harper was reading aloud with curiosity. By the third, she was writing simple stories of her own. She still never asked for anything, not even pencils. But Judson noticed when she hesitated near the small library downstairs and quietly ordered more books, not flashy ones. Simple, worn-in classics with handwritten dedication notes. When they arrived, he pretended not to see the way her fingers brushed over the covers like she was touching treasure. The bond between her and Judson deepened, slow and unspoken. They weren't quite father and daughter, not yet, but something else was forming, something solid, something built on late-night tea in the kitchen when Harper couldn't sleep, on the way Judson would listen without interrupting when she talked about her mother, or how she'd learned to barter crackers for baby formula when they lived behind the bus terminal. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Judson found her in the drawing room, curled up on the window seat with a journal on her lap, and Jerry sleeping beside her in a bassinet. "You look like you're writing something important," he said softly. Harper glanced up, flushed slightly, and closed the book halfway. "It's just a letter," she murmured. "To who?" "My mom," she said, and her voice faltered for a moment. I just, I guess I wanted to tell her that Jerry's okay. That I kept my promise." Judson didn't respond immediately. He just sat on the opposite end of the window seat and nodded slowly. "She would be proud of you," he said. "So incredibly proud." Harper looked down at the letter, then at her brother, then finally at Judson. "Do you think she would be okay with me calling this home?" Judson met her gaze. "I think she would be grateful beyond words that her kids are safe, loved, and together. And I think she'd want you to feel like you belong. Because you do." The moment hung between them like a suspended breath. Harper turned back to her letter, then said very quietly, "I wish she could have met you." Judson swallowed hard. "So do I." That evening, as dusk fell over the estate and golden light bathed the rooms in a honeyed glow, Elijah entered the study with a document folder. "It's official," he said, placing the papers on Judson's desk. "The final adoption forms. All signatures are in place, pending Harper's consent." Judson opened the folder. There it was. Petition for full legal adoption of minors. Harper Elise Harrison and Jerry Malcolm Harrison. All that remained was Harper's agreement. Judson didn't plan to pressure her. This wasn't something he'd ever ask for out of obligation. It had to be her choice. Later that night, he walked into the nursery where Harper was reading to Jerry from a picture book about animals. The baby was giggling at the roaring lion, waving his arms as if trying to mimic the sound. Judson waited until she finished the page, then gently sat on the edge of the carpet. "I have something to show you," he said. He handed her the folder. Harper took it with both hands, opening it carefully. She read slowly, her lips moving as her eyes scanned the legal wording. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking. She looked up. "Does this mean we'd be yours? Forever?" Judson exhaled slowly. "If you want to be. Only if you want to be." Harper didn't speak. She stood up, walked toward him, and did something neither of them expected. She knelt in front of him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and whispered into his ear, "You already are my forever." Judson held her tightly, closing his eyes against the sudden sting behind them. Across the room, Jerry babbled something that sounded suspiciously like "Papa," and began clapping his hands. Judson laughed through the tightness in his throat. Outside the nursery window, the trees stirred in the breeze. Inside, a family, broken, battered, but real, was slowly becoming whole. The morning of the adoption ceremony was unlike any Harper had ever experienced. Sunlight poured into her bedroom in wide, warm sheets, casting golden lines across her quilt and the delicate lace curtains fluttering at the windows. It was the kind of day that felt like a storybook, so perfect it almost didn't feel real. But as Harper sat at the edge of her bed, gently brushing her hair, her reflection in the mirror reminded her that it was real. This day, this life, it belonged to her now. Down the hallway, Jerry was already wide awake, dressed in a tiny navy blue suit with suspenders. He clapped his hands wildly as Molly tried to comb through the baby-fine curls on his head. She laughed and let him win the battle, ruffling his hair back into chaos. Judson stood downstairs, adjusting the cuffs of his simple gray blazer in front of the hall mirror. There was no press, no photographers, only a small ceremony at the courthouse, and a quiet gathering of the few people who had truly stood by them. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It was the beginning of something sacred. In the car on the way to the courthouse, Harper sat between Judson and Jerry. Her hands rested protectively in her lap, while Jerry kicked his legs with excitement beside her, oblivious to the significance of the day. Judson looked over once or twice, as if to ask if she was okay, but said nothing. He knew her well enough by now to understand. When Harper was quiet, it wasn't fear anymore. It was thoughtfulness. When they arrived, the courthouse steps looked enormous to Harper. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed on her shoulders. The years of survival, the losses, the endless fear of tomorrow. She stopped halfway up the steps, looking down at her scuffed shoes. Judson turned to her and offered his hand. Not as a command, not as a guide, but as a choice. She took it. The courtroom was modest. Wood-paneled walls, polished benches, and a judge with a calm, weathered face, and an old leather chair that creaked when he sat down. Judge Harlan Madsen had seen a lifetime of broken families, battles over custody, children torn between systems. But as he watched the three of them walk into his courtroom together, Harper holding Jerry in one arm and Judson's hand in the other, he smiled before the proceedings even began. The hearing was brief but meaningful. The clerk read the names. Judson stated his full commitment, not as a guardian but as a father. Harper was given the chance to speak if she wished. She stood slowly, holding the microphone with trembling hands. "My name is Harper Harrison," she said, her voice clear but soft. "And for a long time, I didn't think people like me got happy endings. I thought we just survived until we disappeared. But then I met someone who didn't look away. Someone who didn't just save my brother, he saved me too. And today, if he still wants us, we want to be his." The judge's voice was warm and unwavering. "And then by the powers vested in me by the state of Wisconsin, I hereby declare Harper Elise Harrison and Jerry Malcolm Harrison the legal children of Mr. Judson Isaac Baines." Harper didn't cry, not right away. She sat there stunned for a moment, absorbing the words like sunlight soaking into her skin. Then, she looked at Judson, her father now, truly, and something inside her finally unlocked. She burst into tears and laughed all at once, collapsing into his arms. Jerry squealed in delight, completely unaware that his last name had just changed, but fully aware that the people he loved most were happy. They returned home to a quiet celebration in the garden. Molly brought out homemade strawberry shortcake. Elijah, awkward but kind, handed Harper a small leather journal with her initials embossed on the cover, Ms. Lavinia gifted her a delicate locket with a picture of her mother inside, found and restored from an old personnel file at Briosec. In the center of the garden stood a new tree. Judson had planted it just a few days earlier, a young maple with roots still adjusting to the soil. Attached to the trunk was a brass plaque that read, "Planted in honor of Sheila Harrison. May her love continue to grow." Harper read the inscription in silence, her fingers tracing the engraving. "I think she would have liked this," she said softly. Judson nodded. "I hope it gives you a place to talk to her when you need to." Later that night, after Jerry was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Harper wandered into Judson's study. He was reading, glasses low on his nose, but looked up immediately when she entered. She hesitated in the doorway, then walked over and stood by his chair. "I never asked," she said, "but do you know why you stopped that day in front of the store? Why you didn't walk away like everyone else?" Judson closed the book slowly. "I don't know," he said after a long pause. "Maybe because I used to think money made me invincible. But that day, I saw you, and I realized there are some kinds of strength I'd never had. The kind it takes to keep someone else alive when the world wants to forget you exist." Harper smiled. "I think you're strong now, too." Judson reached out and took her hand. "Not without you, I'm not." She leaned against the side of his chair, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside the window, the wind stirred the young maple in the garden. Inside, a family sat together in the glow of lamplight. No longer broken, no longer lost, just whole. Finally, fully whole. As the author of this story, I believe the ending holds a kind of quiet, redemptive power that speaks to something deeper than just survival. It speaks to healing and to the way love can grow in the most unlikely places. This wasn't a fairy tale transformation or a rags to riches fantasy. It was about a broken man learning to feel again, and two abandoned children finding a home not through charity, but through mutual courage and connection. Harper never asked for rescue. She asked for dignity, for someone to care enough not to look away. And Judson, in choosing to see her, saved something in himself, too. The final chapter isn't about a perfect ending. There are still scars, memories, wounds that time alone won't erase. But there is peace, safety, and the promise of tomorrow. The image of Harper resting her head on Judson's shoulder, Jerry finally asleep in a warm home, and a tree planted in their mother's memory. That's not just an ending. It's a beginning. A beginning where love isn't born from blood, but from choice. And that, I believe, is the most powerful kind of family there is.